Okay, so good morning everyone. My name's Nick Kenny, and today we're going to be talking about virtualised Operations Manager and how it can help you with smarter operations. So first of all, I thought I'd do a little bit of scene setting, just so we're all on the same page. So this is how I think about an IT department within a business and the demands that the business has upon it. So if you think about what a business typically asks from IT, they'll maybe come up with some new project they want to do, like say they want to analyze, do Twitter analysis or something like that. And this new project, they want it done yesterday, they want it done cheap, and while you're at it, try not to break anything else that's in the environment. They kind of want all three of these things. And I think it's kind of like the old adage of you can have it done fast, you can have it done cheap, and you can have it done right. Pick two out of the three. It's very hard to do all three of these things at once. And I think what's quite interesting is that you can do one of these things very easily. You can do two of these things fairly easily, but doing all three is very, very hard. A lot of people sort of talk about IT departments being squeezed. I actually think they're being pulled apart in all different directions. It's like one of those old sort of torture devices where all your limbs get pulled in a different direction. And I think in the sort of 15 years I've been in IT, the biggest change, I guess, in this dynamic that I've seen is the increase in agility, and it's just ramping up and getting worse and worse. And I think this is kind of logical. So from a business perspective, what the business really wants is they want to roll out new initiatives quickly. Yes, it's great if they can do that kind of efficiently and cost effectively, but in reality, if they wanted to save money, they'd just turn the lights off and send everyone home. And the same with risk. Risk becomes a priority when something bad happens. So typically, a lot of the business focus is really around getting agility, and it's really down to the IT department to make sure that you're kind of maintaining that balance. And most recently, the two biggest impacts I think agility has had has been from an infrastructure point of view, virtualization. So you know, think back sort of 10 years ago when you want to roll out a new server, you have to wait a couple of weeks to actually buy it and get it delivered in and set it all up. People can now spin up multiple virtual machines on demand. Self-service portals, they can spin them up instantly, pretty much until you run out of capacity. So that's had a big impact. Even more recently, things like agile development and DevOps. So if you're doing a lot of in-house writing of software, they've just ramped up their capability to ship new versions. We've gone from a sort of model where new versions of software would come out maybe every 6 to 12 months to the sort of Netflix model of 3 or 4 new versions every day. So that's really ramped up. And the way I kind of think about how that kind of dynamic works is dev will build something and they'll just kind of chuck it over the wall to ops. And then, it's ops' problem to secure it, make it available, make sure it performs, and everything else they have to take care of. And all that's really happened with Agile and DevOps is they've got quicker at chucking stuff over the wall, which has put even more of a strain on ops to actually maintain it. So the focus of today is really talking about how, bearing in mind this ramp up in agility, how we can maintain that balance and try and increase the efficiency and reduce the risk without compromising that agility that we've got. So in terms of who we're talking about, we talk about operations. I think it also helps to kind of set the scene here as well. So there's a few different people that are kind of involved in doing operations. I tend to think about them in terms of their context and what time they work under. So I think of support teams work in a very kind of short-term context. It's really kind of what's happening today. So break fixing, troubleshooting an error that's just popped up, looking through logs, that sort of thing. You then kind of got the administrators who I guess have a kind of a week to a month kind of view. They're looking at fluctuations on servers. They're looking at things that are not causing an immediate impact but starting to become troublesome, rolling out updates and patches and things like that. And then you've got the long term, which are the architects, and this is kind of like your sort of 3 to 5 year plan. So if we've got a massive project that's rolling out next year, we need to be thinking about how we're going to get the extra capacity in the environment, when are we going to have the downtime to upgrade the network switches, all this sort of thing. So you've kind of got the troubleshooting day to day right up to the sort of projects kicking off in a couple of years and everything in between. And realistically, this all kind of falls under operations. And there's a lot of different job roles, but really what everyone's doing is they're making decisions. The only difference really is the kind of the time constraint context of those decisions. And so an operations tool that's going to be effective really needs to cater for all these different teams. So how I think about decision making, I think you have some information and you can make a bad decision with that information, but you can never make a decision that's better than the information that you have. The quality of your decision is based on the quality of your information. So if you're limited what information you have, you're limited in your decision making capability. You can increase the amount of information you have to base those decisions on, and you can increase the quality of it. You can make better decisions. The reality is you can still make bad decisions with good data, but you can never make a great decision with bad information. So that's kind of our first challenge, is getting visibility. And I had a really interesting discussion with a customer last week, and we were just kind of talking about what their environment looked like and sort of what breakdown they've got of it, and they couldn't tell me how many servers they had. We started off sort of saying, how virtualized are you? And they weren't entirely sure. They didn't really know how many hosts they had. They couldn't tell me how many physical servers they've got. And it was sort of like, what ballpark to the nearest 100? They were like, we could probably only do it to the nearest 1,000. And it's not uncommon to have that kind of a conversation where a lot of different teams have spun up different resource, and the kind of central IT function doesn't even know how many servers there are. That tends to get worse the larger the company gets, but it's kind of a common theme. Especially, physical servers are one thing, but when you've got virtual machines people can spin up on demand as well, it becomes even harder to get that visibility. So the first challenge is actually getting the information in the first place. So what the VMware operations can do is get a ton of metrics. And we call metrics little individual data points we can gather. We'll talk about what we've got up here in a minute, but this is some metrics for an Oracle database. That VMware's operations can look at a lot of different sources. So one of the most obvious ones is talking to vCenter. vCenter already collects quite a lot of information, collects about 300 different metrics per virtual machine, and it refreshes those metrics every 30 seconds. So we can draw those down to use. Realistically, we probably use about 150 of those metrics, about half. A lot of them are kind of aggregates. But it effectively means the ops tool immediately, once it's deployed, can be pulling back 150 different metrics per VM every 30 seconds. That's great, but then, what do you actually do with that information? Do you dump it out as a CSV and open it up in Excel? You'd have something like 10 million rows and 150 columns. That's not really that useful to you, so that's kind of your second challenge. But in order to get to that stage, you still need, it's still useful. You still need to get these kind of metrics, and actually you can pull lots of metrics from all different places. So it's not just looking at. Obviously, it does a very good job with VMware virtual machines, but that's by no means what it's limited to. You can pull information from storage, from networks. You'll see on here there's a lot of specific applications like databases, and even some cloud-specific things like specific Amazon services you can pull in, which is really, really useful. And if we look at the metrics, just skip back and look at the metrics here a minute. These are all things that are quite useful to a DBA. You've got things like how many transactions a database is doing per second, its cache hit ratio, all this sort of stuff. You could argue that maybe a DBA wouldn't find this interesting. They'd have their own metrics and their own ways of looking at this. But what is interesting is if you were to drill down on one of these, you could actually look at the storage that underlies this. So if for instance, transactions per second was a lot lower than you were expecting, you can actually drill down and say, well, okay, what storage arrays are actually supporting this? Where's all the data sat? Have we got any issues in any of these arrays? And it would give the DBA the ability to look into other areas other than his database to find out where the problem is. Then you can have the right conversations with the right team to get it fixed. Also useful for apps teams. Is it my application underperforming, or is there a problem with the database? They can very quickly see where in the stack the problem lies, have the right discussion with the right teams. So having data is really, really sort of key. But the second challenge is then making relevant use of that information. Having 10 million metrics a week in an Excel spreadsheet is just not useful. So how can you make that so that it actually makes some sense? So one of the things that I think really makes VMware's operations fairly unique, because I've worked with quite a lot of different operating ops tools in my time, is it has a machine learning component. So typically what you get is if something unusual is happening on a server, you'll start to get alerts. And you could get an alert, if it's polling every minute, you could be getting an alert every minute. And you could come back from lunch and find that you've got like 1,000 emails of one particular alert that keeps going off and off and off. And that's bad in itself. So what some ops tools do, well, they will say, well, okay, if we get this same alert happening 10 times within a set time period, just roll them up and send a single alert. So that to some degree helps, but it could be there's actually nothing wrong with the environment. That could be a normal thing. It could be there's a traffic spike, but it's nothing to worry about, and it's not actually that unusual. And the biggest danger is you get so many of these false alerts, it's a bit like the boy who cried wolf. You end up sticking an email rule in it or just ignoring it, and then when something bad really does happen, you're not aware of it. So the real key is actually understanding what's normal for your environment. So if you think about something like a payroll system, it might sit there and do nothing for most of the month, and then the last week of the month it suddenly spikes in utilization and it's calculating all the payroll details. That would be normal. So what you wouldn't want is an alert to kick off and say, oh no, everything's going crazy on the payroll system. If it's end of month, that's normal for it. What you want to know is if it suddenly starts spiking mid-month, that's unusual. And so what the machine learning in virtualized operations does is every night it'll take all of the metrics that it's gathered and it will analyze all of them, and it will look at what it's going to expect for the next day, and it will use different time windows. So it will say what's normal for this particular day, what's normal for this time of the week, what's normal for this time of the month, and what's normal for this time of the year. And it will look from a number of different perspectives, and it will analyze ahead of time what it's going to expect to see the next day. So anything that falls outside of that, it can actually start giving you intelligent alerts. And that's really key. We'll probably come back and talk a little bit more about that capability later, but I think that's one of, from my personal experience of working in operations for a while and then having sold a few different ops tools, that's a real key differentiator. It's really smart. Another nice thing is when you do get an alert that says there's a problem with the system, you'll actually get some detail around all of the symptoms. So it'll say, we think this is a problem, this is why we think it's a problem, here are all the individual symptoms. If you're using it with another product called Log Insight, you can actually drill down directly and it will pull excerpts out of all the relevant log files, so you don't have to go scanning through it all. It'll also say, well, within this time window, here's all the log extracts, so you can see exactly what's relevant for this particular thing. And then it will offer recommendations on how to fix it. So not only, this is a problem that we think you have, this is why we think it's a problem, here's how you could fix it. And in some cases, we can even give an action to actually automatically fix it. So if it was, for instance, a machine that's maxed out its memory, needs some more memory adding, if you have hotfix enabled on, if you have hot add enabled on that VM, you could have a button that you just click and it would automatically add some more memory in. So you can have sort of full remediation all from within a single screen, which is really useful. So in terms of all these metrics and how they're all rolled together, there's a couple of really high-level concepts that virtualized operations uses. So this is a typical dashboard. You would get this for all different levels within your environment. So you might have a top-level dashboard like this for the whole environment. You might have one of these per cluster. You might have one of these per host, and you can have one of these per VM. So at each different level, you can kind of get this high-level overview. And the way this is broken down, I think is quite nice. So you've got health. That's your immediate problems. That's things that are happening in the environment now. So if you kind of think back to people doing break fix and troubleshooting, the kind of support department, so that's really sort of targeted at them. Risk is kind of your medium-term problems, and this is kind of more at the sort of admin type level. And then efficiency is your long-term problems. This is when you're going to start running out of capacity, and that's kind of for your architects. So it kind of breaks it down into sort of short-term, medium-term, and long-term issues and how you think about them. And within these, it's also quite nicely broken down. So we'll go over each of these in detail, but this is kind of what corresponds to what. So workload, anomalies, and faults all roll up into health. Your risk is based on capacity and time remaining and stress, and we'll talk about in a minute what those mean. And it also includes compliance, and your efficiency is based on density and your reclaimable capacity. So the way it works, if we were to drill down on one of these areas, so in this instance, we're looking at a cluster called VC Demo. The first thing we have is workload. This is what all of your machines are doing here and now. This is how much CPU you're using, how much memory they're using, and this is at this exact point in time. You then have anomalies, so this is where the machine learning comes into play. This is looking at, what's going on in the environment. Is this normal for today, for our particular environment and this particular server? And then we have faults. So faults are actually, when you get an error on something. And what's quite nice about all of these, you can click on the what is faults, and it'll pop up a little explanation of exactly how we measure it. So for this particular instance, it'll give you a score, and that is a score for the worst fault that's in the environment. That's like your worst case. Capacity remaining. So capacity remaining is looking at things like your CPU, your storage, and your memory. How much have you got available for new VMs to be spun up in? And so it might say, well, you've got 2 terabytes of disk space left. But what's really nice about it, you can kind of see in the underneath that pop-up of what will fit. These are your templates. So if you've got, for instance, a SQL server template that has, say, 32 gig of RAM, you might only be able to get 5 of those in your available capacity, whereas you might have a web server that uses 4 gig of RAM and you can get loads of those. So, rather than just an arbitrary figure of this is how much memory and disk space you've got left, it'll actually give you a good idea of what that really means in terms of how many machines you'll be able to fire up, which is useful. And then it kind of goes hand in hand with time remaining. So you might have 2 terabytes of disk space. You might think that's great, but actually your time remaining might say that at the rate you're rolling out new VMs, that's probably going to be gone by the end of next week, which is obviously a bad thing. So the two kind of work hand in hand, and it gives a little bit more context to that capacity remaining. Stress is interesting. So stress is effectively if a machine keeps going over its, keeps getting really, really close to maxing out the resources that it's consuming, and it does that if it only does it kind of once a month, that's a normal peak, and that's fine. But if it keeps going there and it's spending most of its time in a kind of stress zone, and you can set up what you're happy for that to be. So for in a production environment, you might say anything over 70% is stressed. For development and testing, you might say anything over 95%. You might not be too worried about that. Is stress. So you can kind of define that, and then if it's constantly overstressed, that's probably a good indicator that maybe that needs a little bit more resource assigned to it. It probably doesn't have enough. Then we've got reclaimable capacity. So we're going to look at this in a little bit more detail later with some reports, but effectively this is all the over-provisioned things you have. So the sort of typical scenario of someone wants a new application, and you've looked at the recommended specs and it's demanding 32 gig of RAM be assigned to the VM. And so you give it that, and then 6 months later you find out it's only actually been using about 3 gig, and it really didn't need all of that. But we'll go over this in a little bit more detail when we look at the reports. Then we have our density. Again, all of these things you can define yourself, but this is just giving you an idea of are you meeting your density goals of consolidation. And the final one is compliance. So compliance, you can set up some arbitrary rules that you say, this is either regulatory or this is our sort of internal standard that we want to follow, and it'll help you make sure that the environment is adhering to those standards. One other area, there's obviously a lot of different areas to the tool, but one that I think is really worth going into is the project planning. So it's great that we have all these metrics and we can say what we think is normal. But once you've been collecting these metrics for a long period of time, not only do they get more accurate, but we can start looking further ahead and we can start predicting what's going to happen in the future. So we can say things like, well, based on the rate that you're rolling virtual machines out, we can see that, this is how we do the time remaining. We can see you're going to run out of memory in, say, 2 months' time. What happens if you're going to roll a new project out? Well, this area lets you do a what if and say, well, okay, we're going to roll this new project out next week. It has these demands for CPU and memory. If we roll that out, we haven't actually got 2 months left. We're probably going to be over capacity as soon as we roll this new project out. And it lets you do planning. And different teams can put these different, can do these kind of different what if analyses, and just kind of play around and look at, what if and what would happen and when do we need to start thinking about adding capacity. And what's really nice is once you've decided that actually you want to roll this out, and this project is now committed and you're going to go ahead with it, you can change the status of it, and it can start impacting all of the dashboards that we just looked at. So rather than sort of saying, oh yeah, you know, you've got 2 months left of memory, when someone's planning on running a project next week, that'll use it all up, it'll actually change that to say, actually, you know, you've only got 2 weeks left. You've still got a lot in the environment, but someone's planning on using that already, which becomes really, really useful for doing that planning. So I thought we'd go through one of the reports briefly. So this is a capacity report. So the first page of the report, I've just taken, I think, what the relevant parts are out of the report, but this first page just gives you a kind of breakdown of here are all the virtual machines and all the clusters that you have. As you can see, there's a fair spread. There are some overutilized, there are some underutilized. If we start drilling down into some of the detail. So this is what we were looking at on our dashboard. This is our CPU memory and disk space and the time remaining for them. So we can see we're all good on CPU, but we've already run out of memory. We're on 0 days on one of our environments, and we look like we're okay for disk remaining. Let's have a look at those in a little bit more detail. So this one's showing us oversized CPU. So we can see our first machine that we've got on the list. We assigned 12 cores to it when we provisioned it. It averages using about 5% of that capacity. The most it's ever used, and since we've been monitoring it, is less than 30%. So it really probably doesn't need 12 cores. We could probably quite safely give it 8 cores, and it would still be below our whatever our stress threshold, sort of 70% would be. And so if you go through all of these, you can see that out of 144 cores you provisioned, we really only needed 62 of those, so 82 are reclaimable. So over half of our capacity for CPU is actually reclaimable, which is quite interesting. And this is fairly typical for a lot of the reports we would run. We did the same thing for memory. The second one down is probably the most interesting. So 16 gig has been assigned. It's averaged 4% of that used. It's never gone above 12%. So you could probably reclaim the vast majority of that. It only really needs a couple of gig. And again, there's some massive savings you can have there. And then we look at undersized. So we have a machine here that was only assigned 8 cores, but it's recommended to have 11 because it's maxing that CPU out quite a lot. What's really nice is if you've gone through and reclaimed all of the CPU from the over-provision stuff, you'll notice if we flip back quickly, we reclaimed 82 vCPU cores. So if we wanted to assign another few cores to this machine, we've got them now available to do that. So it's just kind of rebalancing what you've already got. Rather than add extra capacity in, it's given the ability to kind of rebalance intelligently. And what's nice about these reports, you kind of find a sort of 80-20 ratio thing going on, where you kind of pick the top 10 worst machines, and if you fix those, that's probably 80% of your problem. And you know, by kind of choosing your battles, you can be very efficient with how you spend your time, and kind of pick the worst ones and get the most benefit from them. There's another few interesting things on the capacity report. So this is idle VMs. This is VMs that are spun up but are doing absolutely nothing. They've just been sat there, but they're still running and booted. And so you can see we've got a total of 18 cores, 33 gig of RAM and half a terabyte of disk through VMs that are sat there and running but actually doing nothing. And then you have a few different areas for storage. So there's one talking about how much is taken up by VMs that are turned off and doing nothing. This one I think is even more interesting. This is the snapshots. So you can see we've got a log server as the top hit. The total disk space, including the virtual machine and all its snapshots, is 300 gig, and 240 gig of that is snapshots. So it looks like there's probably 4 snapshots out of this machine. And this is one of the worst offenders for using up disk space, is snapshots that don't get cleaned up afterwards. You know, realistically, it depends what you use snapshots for. But if it's a log server, you don't really need to capture a point in time for that. It has the capability to sort of look through its database content anyway. You've maybe snapshotted it because you're doing an upgrade and you want to roll it back if things go badly. Once that upgrade's done, do you need that snapshot anymore? You certainly don't need 4 of them. So this is a really good area. And you can see there's a total of, what, 3/4 of a terabyte. Yeah, a whole terabyte of snapshots that can probably be cleaned up. And so to have a look at the totals, 108 vCPUs, 285 gig of memory, and 2 terabytes of disk space that we can potentially reclaim after we've rebalanced everything. So quite a lot. So coming along to a sort of summary now. The way I think operations is typically done, if you don't have visibility, you can only do things as and when they crop up. So when you start getting alerts in your environment, there's an error, you go and troubleshoot it. And it's the kind of typical firefighting approach. And realistically, if you don't have good visibility, this is the best thing you can do. You get visibility when there's a problem, and then you go and fix it. And that means you spend a lot of your time troubleshooting, really kind of working in the issues that would fall under the health section. And then when you get time, you start to sort of, do a little bit of future planning if you've got time available to do that. But really, you rarely get to start working on, your sort of 3-year long-term plan. If something's happened, if a project's rolling out in 18 months, and you've got, 8 different servers have got critical errors on them, you just don't have time to think about that. What's really interesting when you start getting a really good perspective on everything is you can actually start doing things in the opposite direction. So if you start off with the efficiency, as we talked about earlier, you just pick the top 20 hosts that are going to give you the most resources back. If you focus on those and get those resources back, you then have a lot more resource to assign to other systems, and systems that were typically really stressed, you now have the capacity without any extra cost to give those particular systems that are quite demanding with resources to give them extra capacity. And what you'll find is you'll have lots of health issues, quite a few risk issues, and a few efficiency issues. But if you tackle those few efficiency issues, it'll greatly reduce the amount of issues you have in risk. And when those are addressed, that will have a massive impact on health. And you'll find if you work backwards, by the time you actually get to the health, a lot of those problems of systems, things running out of memory and crashing and things, are actually fixed. So take that spare capacity, use it to reduce the risk, and that will probably greatly reduce the number of day-to-day troubleshooting that you need to do. And the reality is you can't take that approach if you don't have that level of visibility. But once you do, it's actually really nice that you can work in the other direction, and it makes everything a lot easier to do. So I guess coming back in summary, we've talked about how agility is one of the sort of biggest current factors for IT to have to deal with. We've talked about how we can start to address that balance and improve some efficiency and reduce some of the risk. And what risk can be a number of different things, and we've kind of talked about risk in the environment, but another risk is obviously security, and I guess that's probably a good lead into our next topic. So that was everything. Thank you very much for listening. Don't know if we want to do questions now or...
Thank you, Nick. Can everyone hear me?
I can hear you.
Good, good. That's a good start. So everyone else is on mute, so that's probably fine. John, are you able to pass me control, please?
Absolutely. I'll just do that now.
Thank you. Right, next. Okay.
There you go. That's perfect. You can see everything.
Good stuff. So I'm here to spend half an hour or so, hopefully, on what, so we've heard a lot from some great things from VMware this morning, but why layer security on top of VMware? What's the value add, the extra value add that someone like Trend Micro can provide? So I think it's fair to say the data center has evolved faster than anyone had imagined, and organizations that we talk to are typically, what we're typically hearing is that they're finding their progress from perhaps entirely legacy, if you like, on-prem approach to perhaps a private cloud or some sort of hybrid cloud environment using public cloud as well. It's being hampered by, or being held back by a lack of security tools which can kind of work in this new way or this new world. So they're finding that the conventional approach to security maybe doesn't scale or work or move with the way the data center is changing. You know, and everyone's having a different journey to the cloud, and it's not to say that everyone's heading, when we talk about the cloud, we're not saying everyone is heading entirely all into the cloud, but you know, that move from physical servers to virtual servers, virtual desktops, these hybrid environments whereby you know, every organization is highly likely to always have something in their own data center, some legacy apps or some legacy reason why, but you know, the economies of scale, the flexibility, the value in moving to a kind of a hybrid cloud data center setup are undeniable. So everyone's journey is different, but what we're finding is that, you know, again, we need to have tools which have visibility of all of those workloads or VMs, regardless of where they are, how many are spun up or down on an ad hoc, planned, or perhaps, you know, in the shadows. We talk about shadow IT a lot, in the shadows kind of basis, and therefore we need to be able to automatically place those security policies or wrappers around these endpoints, and we need to do that in a workload or context-aware manner. So we need to be able to say, okay, this is a web server, let's apply an appropriate policy around that. This is a SQL server, let's apply appropriate policy around that. And I guess these two pieces map pretty well into the agility and the risk side of things that Nick was talking about earlier. But most of all, you know, we need to look at state-of-the-art security capabilities to meet the needs not only of today but also the future. You know, you think about GDPR, that thing that everyone's talking about and no one really knows what to do about necessarily. But you know, one of the things that GDPR is very clear about is that you need to be able to show that you have leveraged or used state-of-the-art technology in order to prevent and secure your data against these breaches or these leaks. And there's only going to be more kind of legislation and controls put around data and the way people do things in the future. So with that in mind, you know, we're largely interested today in talking about this kind of area on people's journey. Certainly in a VMware context, the virtual servers, virtual desktops, the hybrid environments where you've got bits of both. And to a certain extent, a little bit about the public cloud as well. So AWS hosts a VMware in the cloud service as well. So things like that we can work with as well. But what the three real key concerns that we hear from prospects and customers alike are, you know, in terms of their move to the cloud or in that direction, is we need visibility. We need to be able to automate these things because, you know, a lot of the cloud piece and the virtualization and the kind of virtual data center piece is about realizing those economies of scale, being able to move into a more DevOps, DevSecOps way of working, the agility, the speed of being able to react, businesses be able to react to new market needs or market pressures. So you need that automation. You can't work in this manual, high-touch way. So you need that automation. But, you know, at a high level, you absolutely still need to make sure things are secure. And that brings us on to Trend Micro. And we split our product set into three areas. And today we're going to be talking about the hybrid cloud security product area, which really gives us this blend of cross-generational threat defense techniques. So, you know, employing a whole bunch of different technologies or techniques that we'll see in a few slides' time to optimize the protection for really physical, virtual, cloud and container-based workloads, fully connected by our smart protection network, which again we'll talk about in a few slides' time very briefly, to give you that rapid response to new threats, new incidents, unseen threats, and it, you know, again, it needs to be highly integrated with your infrastructure, so your VMware hypervisors technologies that you've got in your data center already. So, you know, we're looking to give you a single platform for your cloud deployments, supporting, you know, multiple cloud or application service providers within a single view. and that's a key point to make there. So leaders such as VMware, AWS, Azure, and well over 20 other CSPs that we support, giving you the support for those hybrid deployments, single pane of glass management, and deep integration with certainly the leaders in that space, such as VMware and your AWS, your Azures, to automatically detect and protect new workloads. And actually, what you need is a single solution that deploys the same way as you deploy your dynamic workloads. So with things like automatic script generation, integration, and perhaps leveraging some of the leading orchestration tools out there, all of which we have integration with. But the key point there, and I've said it before, is to be able to enable that security at the workload level with the context-aware policies that I mentioned previously, and which scale in the same way as the cloud scale. So no bottlenecks, and automatically and dynamically without the need for human intervention. So when you've got matey boy in IT spinning up a VM or two on the side to try and just get a job done, well, we have visibility of that, and we automatically protect those shadow IT systems without all of a sudden opening the organization up to a massive potential breach or hole in the security. So just to talk about features for a brief second, let's actually expand the entire slide. So we employ, as I said, we employ a kind of a unique blend of cross-generational threat defense techniques. And in the middle there, you'll see that's fueled by our global threat intelligence network. We call it the Smart Protection Network. And it's something like 155 million sensors, thousands of new threats being detected a day, terabytes of data being processed every day. So that all of our products are linked by that to enable us to get new threat information and data out to endpoints globally as quickly as possible. And of course, endpoints include servers and workloads in the cloud. So, our anti-malware continues to be enhanced and is a critical point for eliminating the high volume of known good and known bad. But then we look to employ things like behavioral analysis, including memory inspection, suspicious action monitoring, and these things are really looking to examine the more unknown items as they're perhaps trying to load and looking for suspicious behavior in the OS applications, scripts, how they're interacting, and looking to block them if they're doing stuff they shouldn't be doing. We've all heard about, or hopefully we've all heard about machine learning being kind of evolving into being a critical piece of that protection in recent times. And of course, we employ machine learning as well. We have sandbox analysis so that we can take any object that looks suspicious, but we can't form a total kind of for sure view on whether it is malicious or not. We can take that object, that file, that script, whatever it may be, that URL, load it into a sandbox, click the URL, run the script, execute the file, see what it does, take note of what it does, create a suspicious, as we call it, a suspicious object, and then share that out not only with the rest of your infrastructure to go out across the range and perhaps reactively and go back and retrospectively see where that unknown, never seen before threat has penetrated your network, but also to share that suspicious object information with third-party technologies you might have more at the perimeter of your network, but also with the Smart Protection Network, so other customers and people around the world get to benefit from that detection and that increase in protection as well. So the sandboxing is on-the-fly analysis, IPS to protect against vulnerabilities. So, for example, instantly shielding vulnerable applications and servers with a virtual patch. So a very rapidly deployed network-level band-aid to prevent the exploit or the vulnerability coming into the endpoint until you can take the time to perhaps physically apply that patch to that operating system or that application. So we're not saying don't patch, stop patching. What we're saying is you can realize real value by using deep security to mitigate the need to patch so often, therefore extending your patch schedules and eliminating the downtime, perhaps the cost of overtime, and all the testing that needs to go into patching and organising those change control windows. Then finally we have things like application control and integrity monitoring to lock down systems, identify suspicious changes, as well as stuff like log inspection to raise awareness of anomalous behaviour. So I don't know, for example, five or more failed local admin logons on an endpoint in a short period of time. Well, that's probably something we want to know about, so we can configure rules to alert us to things like that happening. So that's a little bit about features for a moment. And that's great, so that all sounds good, but what makes Trend Micro, I guess, a worthy partner when looking to secure your hybrid cloud infrastructure or your VMware infrastructure? And I think the first point that I'd like to make is, we have a long and lengthy history of innovation at Trend Micro. This is just really, what you see here is more the recent points in the kind of cloud, hybrid cloud context. But what's interesting here is that, the VMware first and the cloud first demonstrating, a clear track record of Trend Micro predicting and keeping up with market needs and trends and this evolving kind of data center landscape. And just to drill a bit more in furthermore, in purely the VMware context, we've been working very closely with VMware for a little over 10 years, actually helping to develop their security APIs when they first introduced them to the hypervisor, as they now look into the place where they now exist in NSX. Deep security has been absolutely designed from the ground up for server workloads on a VMware platform. So, look at things like the agentless capabilities that we have, the application integrations in terms of vSphere, vCloud Air, vCenter operations integration, those kind of things. We position Trend Micro and VMware as being a pretty irresistible combination in terms of the prospect for how to manage, grow, and realize a dynamic data center while securing it at the same time. But, so what, you might say? Well, we hear from customers all the time that this combination gives a more mature solution. More mature solution equals better support. Better support is higher customer satisfaction and higher customer value, and that's really what we're driving towards. So you've heard a bit from me about, how great the Trend Micro technology is, but, I'm going to say that, aren't I, because I work for Trend Micro, but to, in some way, try and back that up. If you look at Gartner's Magic Quadrant for endpoint protection, and bearing in mind that when Gartner form these views of the endpoint protection platforms, they consider servers, so deep security, endpoints of deep security or protecting to be endpoints, as well as your desktops, laptops, all those kind of things. So, we've been farthest top right in the Magic Quadrant for over 10 consecutive quadrants. I think it's closer to 14 or 15, but don't quote me on that. So over 10 years of leadership in terms of Gartner's view on what makes the best, the most, the most capable endpoint platform. Talking about deep security specifically, similarly IDC has rated deep security market leader in server security for 7 straight years. So, it's no coincidence that both Gartner and IDC have formed similar views on Trend Micro and technology that we are talking about deploying or employing to secure your workloads. And why is that a good thing? Well, a mature solution, 7 years straight, is a reliable solution. Reliable solutions lead to happy customers, and happy customers become repeat customers, and that's what, really what we want, what we're striving for. We want to sell technology. We want to make happy customers so they continue to buy and invest in our technology. So, a lot of stuff on there. Takeaway from this slide really is one product, all types of data centers, one place to manage all of your workloads or endpoints, virtual machines, regardless of whether you're a small, medium, or large customer. And really one product that can adapt and change and scale with your organization. So, let's say tomorrow there's a complete U-turn or IT strategy change, no problem. The work's already been done, deep security is deployed, it's flexible enough and capable enough to work with those changes. And that's the kind of flexibility, again, that we hear from customers So, you know, VMware NSX customers, for example, that's the kind of flexibility, they're the reasons why they buy the VMware technologies, and that's the kind of flexibility that they're looking for. So, you know, that's why we architect deep security to very much work hand in hand with, you know, the VMware, underlying VMware technologies, and work in a similar way. But going back to an earlier statement, now what do organizations want? They want visibility, they want automation, and they want security on top of all of that. They need the visibility and the automation to really, they are the payoffs for moving from the old world to the new world, be it, you know, highly virtualized, highly available, highly redundant, hybrid cloud, or, you know, private or public cloud infrastructures. So we're talking about doing things such as, you know, removing the operational visibility gap. So integration with vRealize Operations Manager, which I think was the solution that Nick was showing us earlier. So we're able to now move to a place whereby we can correlate those system security events to really easily, quickly identify and then remediate those problems, or, you know, remediate the root cause. We can better understand our infrastructure. So we have, I think we'll talk to it on a further slide again, but we have full integration with the VMware software suites to give you visibility of all of those endpoints, regardless of which host they're on, which, you know, ESXi host they're on, for example. We also have integrations into your Amazon, your Azure connectors, Active Directory, and a bunch of other integration points as well, to give us that real visibility that we need. So we can look to, in terms of automation, we look to eliminate manual security processes. So we deliver that broad range of security controls that we saw a few slides ago around in that circular picture, and really give you that context aware or context sensitive controls. So the ability to run a scan against a system to find out what applications are on that system, so we can figure out the role of that. And again, if we find SQL Server, apply a rule set to block SQL vulnerabilities. If it's a web server, block cross-site scripting or SQL injection vulnerabilities. So just, you know, again, it's that context-sensitive awareness and the automation. So we get the visibility to perform the automation. We have the context-aware information to be able to apply the appropriate policy when we're automatically applying that policy. As I said earlier, you know, we integrate or link into vCenter to AWS Azure, vCloud Air, Active Directory, and a number of other infrastructure pieces to enable that automation. We've already really spoken it in a way to the majority of what's on this slide. The point I want to make is, by leveraging deep security, you're future-proofing the investment that you make today, and it will be a solution that can move with you from wherever you are today on that journey. Bearing in mind that journey starts with physical on-premise servers and could or can end with full all-in the cloud. Deep security can move and scale and work with you wherever you start on that journey and wherever you end on that journey. And the key point there in the bold at the bottom there, don't worry about which VMs or which machines or workloads are where. Deep security policies travel with them wherever they are, wherever they exist, whether they get vMotioned off to another host, burst into the cloud, whatever it might be, the policies and the security travels with those endpoints. We talked a little bit about virtual patching earlier, so it's very much about reducing operational impacts, reducing operational costs. Again, you know, emergency patching costs money in terms of, you know, all of the testing that needs to go into it, all of the overtime for the guys that are actually doing that, and then the testing afterwards. Hey, what if we apply a patch, it goes wrong and we can't roll back that patch? We then have to start looking at restoring from backup, and it just becomes a mess. So whatever we can do to reduce that patching cycle and mitigate that risk as quickly as possible is only a good thing. And absolutely, you know, with the deep security, IPS and the vulnerability shielding, that's what we can offer with that particular module. And again, we automate that with the recommendation scans to give you that context-aware patching or virtual patching. We can also, with this, do things like support operating systems or patch against you know, the latest vulnerabilities and exploits, OSs that are no longer supported by, for example, Microsoft. So Windows 2003, no longer getting any patches for that. Well, we still support an agent, a deep security agent on Windows 2003, so you can actually mitigate against the current risks and threats today by virtually patching those holes in that operating system. I want to make the point of shell shock, for example. So, you know, 5 days. So we released detection for shell shock 5 days after it was first discovered. It was subsequently published, and then we had protection with an IPS rule to defend against shell shock. Now that was just under 3 years ago. You can see still 5 days later, people are having problems. You know, shell shock is still around today. So a year later, you know, we are blocking so many attacks against shell shock vulnerabilities that people, and you know, within 5 days of something as serious as shell shock coming out, it's very rare or very few customers that had the bandwidth, the capability to take down critical systems and patch them in that shorter period and that shorter notice. So you can see from the graph, it's one of the graphs from our deep security widgets or dashboard. You can see that at the point 5 days after shell shock was published or announced, our IPS engine, the number of rules it was running in both detect and prevent mode, instantly shot up, and that was automatic. So that would have been on the basis of a vulnerability scan, an assessment scan that ran. Oh yeah, you've got some vulnerable software. We'll apply the appropriate rules. And it just happened automatically. Heartbleed still a problem today, and yeah, this was January 2017. Okay, so UK is not faring too badly, number 7 on the list, but it shows you there's still, you know, 6,500 servers in the UK that have been found to be vulnerable to Heartbleed, and that's because they're critical systems, or they're systems that actually people either have forgotten about, don't know about, that are part of some cluster or something somewhere and they've missed, or that they're systems that just cannot be taken down. So again, with our virtual patching, our IPS rules, we're able to almost instantly protect against these real problems. You can think of deep security as a massive compliance accelerator. So we have multiple controls that we can deploy or employ in order to protect. We've already spoken about legacy environments, but to give you consistent security across all of your environments or workloads, wherever they are. To use an example, take an example, so PCI, 12 key requirements. Of those 12, you know, Trend Micro alone is approved as a mitigating control for 8 out of 12 of those requirements. So, okay, not everyone is subject to PCI compliance requirements, but it goes to show the flexibility and the capability of deep security, in that it can, just with one tool, we can satisfy 8 out of 12 core PCI requirements. Similarly with the SANS, CIS top 20 critical controls, 14 out of 20 with one agent, one product, deep security. So again, you know, highly effective, highly flexible technology or tool that you can deploy to go a long way towards giving you whatever compliance, meeting whichever compliance requirements or standards that an organization has. We are very good at sharing information. So we have certain integrations with certain SIM applications. We also support a kind of, you know, standards-based syslog output, so that, you know, you can get a whole lot of event-based information out of deep security, push it into a SIM for that event correlation across all of your tools within an organization. I don't know whether people are still struggling with VDI and resourcing that. I know Nick was talking about resources and, you know, the getting visibility into resources in the VMware context earlier. Well, you know, by using deep security with perhaps the agentless capability, so protecting the virtual machines at the hypervisor level without needing to place an agent within every VM that's spun up or spun down, we can absolutely help organizations realize greater density of virtual machines per host, and you know, that really is one of the key challenges that we hear from customers today in making their investment in that VDI infrastructure pay off, is the ability to squeeze as many VDI sessions from each host as possible, as well as improving excuse me, on the performance for their users. In terms of platform support, well, you know, with deep security, do not consider platform support a problem anymore. Thousands of kernels supported, all of the obvious flavors of Windows that you'd expect. I mean, 7 and 8 aren't on there, but we do support the desktop, all of the desktop OS versions, even back to XP. Actually, XP's on there, and a wide range of non-Windows OSs, including all of the kind of AMIs and the builds that you get from your cloud providers as well. Looking to leverage new technologies such as Docker containerization or other containers, then, you know, absolutely we have actual specific Docker integration and support coming for other containers on the roadmap. So you can secure not only the host that runs the containers, but also the actual containers running within that host. And again, you get that consistent security policy, console, and visibility across all of your workloads, regardless of where they are. And as companies move towards releasing faster, more frequent technology stack updates, you know, deep security absolutely expands and keeps up with that in order to accelerate compliance and security of those systems. Excuse me. So just to go back to the beginning ever so slightly and recap, you know, when we talk about this smart cross-generational blend of threat defense techniques fueled by global threat intelligence, you know, we're referring to all of these features that you can use to form a policy that you automatically and with context apply to your endpoints, regardless of whether they're on a private physical machine, anywhere between a physical machine in your office or data center, all the way up to a workload that sits in an entirely public cloud infrastructure, and anywhere in between. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to skip through this. This slide at a very high level is just showing how we employ those different layers or levels of technology in a manner which gives you the best performance and the greatest accuracy in detecting new and rapidly changing and indeed unknown threats. Excuse me. And back to a very early statement that I made, this is part of a connected threat defense strategy. So I mentioned the other areas, or I mentioned this is one of 3 areas that we break our products down into, and that's hybrid cloud security. This area in the middle here is where we were, sorry, on the left here is where we were talking today. We also have network defense, which involves sandboxing, network breach detection and threat analysis, and also things like next-gen IPS. Then user protection, which is anything really that hits users, so your web email gateway, cloud apps, things like Office 365, so completely infrastructureless, API-driven security for things like Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, online storage providers, not only the Microsoft ones, but Box, Dropbox, and others, Salesforce.com coming, so we can prevent people from uploading unwittingly or purposefully uploading infected files, documents to Salesforce.com. And that's all tied together by our smart protection network, as you can see at the bottom, and then you've got the visibility and the control with single pane of glass central management for all Trend Micro products, and the ability to share those suspicious objects that we create from the results of any sandboxing any unknown or never before seen threats across all of our product set, again, as I mentioned earlier. Finally, we do have a VMware specific landing page. So if you go to trendmicro.com/VMware, you've got a whole load of resources and videos and information around how we are optimized for a VMware infrastructure and the integrations and some of the key benefits. There's some videos as well. In terms of deep security in the product that I spent the vast majority of this last half an hour or so talking about, we've got a specific landing page for that too, trendmicro.com/hybridcloud. And that is me done. Thank you everyone for your time, for listening in. Hope it's been of value. And I think we can open the floor up to questions, comments. I don't see any questions in the chat window. If anyone has any questions that they either want to ask verbally or tap into the chat, now would be probably a great time to open up the floor for that. Thank you. Sensing we either did a great job, Nick, or everyone has been cut off.
I guess one final thing from me that I didn't mention. This is Nick. If you're interested in that capacity report that I walked you through, there's actually an assessment that we can do on your environment, and that report is one of a number of reports that gets run from that assessment. So if you thought that was quite interesting and you'd be interested in seeing those reports, with your data from your environment, then get in touch, because that's something we can do. We call it the VOA. So if that's of interest.
Well, John, I think over to you really. I'm not hearing or seeing any questions, so.
No, absolutely. Well, yeah, if we've not got any questions, I think we'll get everything closed off. From my point of view, Mark and Nick, thank you so much for delivering that. It's, and certainly from my point of view, it's been able to provide some exceptional insight into both VMware and Trend Micro. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. If anybody has any questions, please follow them through to your account managers at SHI, and I can help out with that going forward. So it doesn't look like we've got any questions at all. So fantastic job all. Thank you very much, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye bye.